Hello and welcome to the Locker Room to Boardroom podcast. My name is Ryan Blake. I'm the founder and director of Ryan Blake Performance Coaching and your host. This podcast is for senior leaders operating inside elite sport, executives, directors, managers, coaches, ultimately decision makers carrying sustained responsibility, scrutiny and pressure. The purpose of this conversation is simple: to explore how leadership actually functions under pressure, not how it's described in theory. We focus on judgment, decision-making, authority and sustainability, the systems that protect performance when stakes are high, time is limited, and expectations don't. This isn't a motivational show. It's not about mindset hacks or inspirational stories. It's about understanding what allows high performance to hold up over time, minimizing unnecessary stress, maximizing personal fulfillment, and building leadership systems that last. Today's conversation is with David Balcombe. David is a former professional cricketer who has since transitioned into executive leadership and coaching, working across high-performance environments in both sport and business. That combination gives him a perspective on how pressure is experienced, managed and sustained over time across very different contexts. This conversation explores what carries across those environments, what doesn't, and what tends to break when performance is pushed without structure. We discuss different performance environments, transferable performance systems, identity and transition, decision quality under pressure, authority and influence, performance sustainability, the difference between coaching leaders and coaching athletes, the hidden cost of performance, and much more. Let's begin. David, welcome to the show. Please can you start by letting the listeners know who you are, what you've done, and what you currently do?
Yeah, so look, good to be here, Ryan. So David Balcombe. So I've had a rather eclectic career. I started my life out in professional sports, played cricket for 10 years on the county circuit, and then transitioned into the world of large global corporate environments where I've done numerous things from business development, running different in-market activities within professional services, and all the way through to now I'm responsible for looking at the human component of global businesses. So very much around leadership, teamwork, and sort of the people aspects of driving performance in business.
Fantastic. So I just wanted to start by asking, what responsibilities were you carrying in those roles? And how did the nature of pressure compare between them?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think when I was reflecting a little bit around my career and the differences between the two, I think the similarities across both are about just how you show up in those environments, so on a daily basis. So I think the responsibility is how do you show up and just be the best person you could possibly be for the moment that you're required to be there or be in. And very much I think that cuts across both. But I think if you look at the sports environment, very much the responsibilities cover, the technical, tactical, mental, physical. Like you've got some pretty well articulated areas. And I think moving into business, they're probably less well defined to some extent. But definitely that was a big exploratory phase for me, transitioning from quite a structured, I knew my responsibilities, how I needed to show up across different areas, and then into probably a working environment that is quite ambiguous and sort of demands you to really think about how intentional you are, where that intentional focus needs to be. So I think the pressures are different, right? So I think in sport, it's very visible. So you sharpen those different areas and they're very visible in terms of like the output measures that are seen. And I suppose how your performance on the field is received. And pretty much straight away whether you've done a good or a bad job, and someone's pretty quick to tell you that as well, positive in a negative way. But I think also in business, the pressure is much more on yourself to work out what that situation demands of you. And I found that they're so different and they're quite sporadic and quite different. And there are some consistencies that sit within that as well. But very much as I've got more senior, I can be in a week and I can have a very, very different looking week from one to the next. Whereas in sport, there's probably an element of a bit more consistency actually, and a bit of a habit and a repetitive nature, which drives a set of behaviours that you almost know you're waking up and showing up to do. And in business, it's a little bit different, actually it's harder, right? So I think those are the two differences between the pressure, I suppose, I felt and have felt between sport and business.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's a great start. Thanks for sharing that. So just related to this, in the context of kind of the performance environments you're in, when you look at elite athletes versus senior executives, where do you usually see, or in your experience, where do you see the biggest differences and how pressure is experienced day to day?
Yeah, I think in sport, it's naturally built in as a bit of a train, perform, recover cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more around the peaks and the troughs of where you might feel or pressure's a bit more noticeable, I suppose, in those environments. In business, I feel you operate in a much more performative state a lot of the time. And actually, you've got to be much more intentional about the way you practice or think about how you're going to show up in quite critical moments. And it's probably not inbuilt that is a natural cycle to go through. You're constantly on. And I think the immediacy of the business world now, and just how like technology has made you kind of this always on culture, and you've got to be very disciplined personally to draw your boundaries and set where you're going to spend your time and how you're going to spend your time. I think in sport, it's much more of a given that it's about what you've performed and you've given max output, and now it's a recovery time. Right, and now you're going to have a training period or a training block, or you're injured. So this is what we're working on. And I think there's much more deliberate practice. It's a context of the environment, right? But in business, I think you're always on, which drives that. And you're constantly in this performative state as opposed to practicing to perform. I think sometimes you just don't get that opportunity. So if that helps answer the question, but I think that those would be my biggest reflections of it.
Absolutely. Great answer. And have you found that the more experience you've had, like the easier it's got, or do you feel that you're still unsure about that?
I think so within that, right, I think confidence is a big one. And I think belief and confidence, however you work. But I think the big one for me has been how you build belief or build confidence, which almost affords you the permission to respond better in certain situations. So if you think about it I look at confidence now, and I wish I'd known this in sport, right? But I look at confidence a lot about a process you follow. It is something that you can be quite deliberate about. It doesn't just happen. And so people wake up, I feel really confident today. Like, where did that come from? I've worked out that actually much more around forming a process, thinking deliberately, being much more conscious about how I show up or the conversations I want to have, or carving out that non-negotiable time to prep for an interaction and for having permission to say no, I think is what I've learned. I think when I first came into a corporate world, I found it very difficult to draw boundaries because I didn't know how to. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, what I was not supposed to do. I didn't know where the best use of my time was. And so I think I've learned now over a period of time how to build belief, how to build confidence. And that's helped calm me in quite pressure situations. And then the bit that I learned from sport is that preparation piece. Like, if you don't do the preparation, don't expect to succeed. And you can't critique or genuinely give yourself feedback or look in the mirror and go, I did my best job, because you haven't practiced to perform.
Yeah.
And so in business, I try and stick to that. And if I'm going to stand in front of a room of leaders, of an exec team, and I'm going to be giving them what they need and showing up in my best, I've got to prepare for that. And if I don't, I'm doing them a disservice, and I'm doing myself a disservice, and no one's a winner in that situation.
Absolutely.
So I definitely felt that having a process to building the confidence to enable me to calm myself, to show up, to build belief as well has been really helpful for me.
Found the same. Obviously, we've worked in similar environments, and we now also work in similar environments. So there's a lot of similarities between our experiences. Very simply, I found that there is a link between preparation and longer term success. And there's even more of a link between no preparation, shorter term success. And that took me quite a while to learn. And you can get away with it sometimes. And you might occasionally be thrown into situations or environments where you can't prepare, where you have minimal preparation time, which is a little bit of an outlier. But I can completely relate to that point.
Just quickly on that, because I think that's important. I think how you reflect on success. So I think sport actually does this quite well, and this is a bit of a winning after winning, which is really hard to do because you do get found out. But what I found in business is we often interrogate when it hasn't gone quite so well, but we probably don't interrogate why it went well. And I think that can be glossed over. But that's the bit for me that builds the belief, because it goes, actually, and again, it goes back to that as a process to winning, as a process to success, as a formula. And actually, if you work out, like, you hear success leaves breadcrumbs, and I've learned that actually in business, where, why are we not thinking about what we did that was successful here and that got us the win? And so I spend a bit of time there actually being quite deliberate in reflecting, because it builds my belief. And going, actually, no, there's moments where you doubt. You go, no, actually, hang on a minute, the proof points don't align to that. So you're okay, crack on, keep going, and have that conviction. So I think it's definitely something I've learned. It's taken a long time for me to understand that to a level that helps me with performance.
Absolutely. Great point. So just to move on to discuss kind of performance systems, particularly those that are transferable. So what would you say the most valuable performance systems from elite sport are that senior leaders in business often overlook that could really help them?
Yeah. So the biggest one for me is the deliberate nature of that train, perform, recovery cycle, which I spoke about earlier. And one thing that I observed when I came into the corporate world is that that's not a natural default position for people to think about. And it goes back to that always on type culture, where people expect an output all the time from themselves, or the environment expects that, and they don't ever build in the rest or recovery period. That's a bit of a classic. You get 25 to 30 days annual leave a year. Now in sport, you're actually a lot more downtime than you are performing time, to some extent. And so I think it's that build of recovery of, like, good sleep hygiene, diet, training, like thinking about your health, like a holistic approach to your recovery and performance, and creating those sustainable habits and behaviors that are going to lead to outcome. I think sport's a lot more visible with, like, the healthy, good habits, where it be skill development, thinking about developing a new, like, capability that's going to help you in your career, or thinking more around, like, food that you're going to consume is going to give you the right energy for the day. And I think in business, that's sometimes not as front and center. And big one for me has been about keeping on top of my health fitness. And I have found the reason I do that is just a mental clarity and genuinely carving out some recovery time that's going to give me the energy back to keep going and to show up, like I said, the right way as much as possible.
Many of the business leaders I currently work with, they're very aware of the value of recovery. However, it's not intentional. And therefore, it's not done at all, or if it's done half-heartedly. And they can't understand why they're reaching that ceiling of energy and that ceiling of clarity, because they've not fully reset, they've not fully recharged. And I often give them the scenario of having your phone and a charger. When your battery's low, you plug it in and then you unplug it when it's charged. Your body and your mind aren't a lot different. And it's that intentional practice is so key, but the understanding of that and the application of that is difficult when your world is so busy. Just to move on to the next point I'd like to discuss, David, this is around identity and transition. And I would imagine this is going to be a key point for you. Many athletes and practitioners struggle with things when they step away from sport. So what did you kind of learn personally about identity when making that transition?
Yeah, I learned a lot. This is the steepest curve I went on when I transitioned out of sport. And I was really confident when I was in sport that I was quite rounded, that my identity wasn't fully set as a cricketer. It was done internships. I've got this world outside of cricket, friendship groups and others. But actually, when the reality struck that I was no longer a cricketer, I actually realised how tied my identity was to being a cricketer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it took me a while to get there. And I found that quite hard. And then I found that the bits around it probably were, whilst you feel that it's quite a relaxed structure because you do have a lot of downtime and you got a lot of time on your hands. It's just the nature of sport. I craved the structure back that actually there was there. I had quite a structure to my life that was built up around being a sportsman for 10 plus years and then on pathways into sport as well. And I felt there's a few things key there, like the purpose to train. Like why was I going to the gym anymore? Like over and above a vanity potentially.
Mm-hmm.
What was driving me to need to train? You know, I didn't have an injury to get back on the pitch for. I didn't yet. So there was nothing there that was that real motivating factor behind doing it. So I had to find another way or why that I was training. And then I think you lose the potential, the security that you never thought you needed. So you have to work out another way of finding income. You have to think about what you're going to spend the next 30 years of your life doing. And you're going to have only ever known cricket. So what else could I do? Who's going to want me? So you've really got to kind of do this real kind of almost life audit of yourself and think about where your new identity is going to be found. And I think that was a journey I went on, and I spoke to loads of people. I tried to understand people that had gone on that journey before me. Mm-hmm. And then I did a bit of reading around it, and it's probably me. But I wanted to understand it at a deeper level.
Yeah, sure.
And then that really helped, and setting myself goals. Huge, like achievable stuff, like real short-term achievable goals that I felt positive ticking off and working towards. And that really helped me land into a new career. And I haven't really looked back, actually, which has been quite nice. Fantastic. Well, I have every now and then.
Yeah,
I
sure.
haven't looked back in terms of losing momentum, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. In terms of timeline with that identity transition, did you set yourself one, or did you find it was a quick process, or did it take longer than you expected?
I probably didn't realise it was as big a challenge until I was almost down and further into it than it was. I was kind of, looking back now, is easy to sort of chart a timeline, I suppose. But at the time, I didn't really appreciate, you're in it, so you're kind of working through it. I think I'd set different goals within it and different timelines to work towards. So I'd given myself a year where I could just explore and find. So I knew I had that anyway, regardless of when I retired. I'd almost set that up in advance. I look back now and that's the best thing I did. And then I'd set myself a goal of, in that year, working out the career path that I wanted to explore and go on. Then I'd set myself, right, this is the date. It happened to be 18 months post-retiring that I need to be fully in a job and settled into something that I'm going to stick with for a period of time, that I'm going to give it my all. And I think because I put a process, I'd goal set, I'd put little mini milestones in and I'd work towards them. I actually landed 18 months full-time role into a career that I've actually stuck with for 10 years nearly now. And that I think for me was how I did it. But I kind of I broke it down and I got there. And that's a big lesson for me, is don't set the big lofty goal and then fall short. Like, kind of set your milestones as you go. But looking back, I think that was the bit that helped me, definitely.
A lot of athletes that I currently work with and used to work with aren't necessarily that prepared and planned as you were. And there is definitely a steeper drop if there's not something in place afterwards. It is a really difficult situation to find yourself in, because you are completely lost. But there are a lot more player career transition or player support services available now. And it's great to see that, because it's not an easy thing for athletes to deal with by themselves.
No, I agree. I think there's actually, in the last, since I retired, which a long time ago now, really, the development in that area has been vast. And it was pretty good, actually, when I was playing. There's a lot of awareness around it. I think you're right. I think by I definitely lent on my external network. I think that's really important. And it's just having a good conversation and with people that have that be mentoring or somebody completely separate, give you a completely different point of view, because you do get into a bubble of your sport and you interact with the same people within your sport, and actually going out of that is quite liberating to some extent. And I only saw it as a positive, actually.
Mm-hmm.
At times, it was like, that it was going to end at some point. So I had to embrace it. And actually saw, when I flipped it to be a really positive thing, an opportunity for me to explore something new, to carve a new career. Like, not many people get a chance to go somewhere completely different in their career. And I was forced into it. All sports people are at some point. And it was great to look back now and I go, it's the best thing that actually happened to me.
Absolutely. So in terms of decision quality, particularly decision quality under pressure, what would you say the best practices you've seen are in your past environments and your present environments that protect that?
Yeah, going back to, I think I started to allude to it earlier, is about this whole sort of confidence, and seeing confidence as a process that you go through to obtain. So I think it's the biggest thing that you can work on that will help calm you in those moments where you like perceived or actual pressure that you're going into. And I think the worst place you can be is that sort of fight, flight, freeze mentality, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of that comes from don't know where to go with this. And if you're deliberate with how you built the confidence to be in that situation, you visualized it, you have thought deliberately and with intent about how you're going to be successful in that moment, and you've practiced it.
Yeah.
You then will have the confidence to react in that moment. I've definitely seen that in business, for example, when I've been thrown into meetings last minute, but the topic area, or I've seen it before, or I've actually been preparing for that without realizing, and it's acknowledging that I've actually got the preparation in the locker to bring out in that. It's those tools, those techniques that I've developed and talk a lot with leadership groups, like mindset, skill set, tool set. Like you've got to have a mindset that you want to be there, and you've got to go, right, this is going to be tough, but I want to be there. I've got all the tools that I can pull out, and they're based around like a really key skill set that I've developed that is going to make me dangerous in this moment. It's going to make me impactful in this moment. And I think that reaffirms, and then you go into that moment and you're successful, which is built on a foundation of preparation anyway. It then just reinforces and makes you even more confident the next time you go into that situation.
Yeah, sure.
And it definitely, like, you can see that it's very visible in sport. Like, I'd never go out and try and execute 6 Yorkers in a row in a match if I've not practiced it. How can you possibly do that in a moment that's there's something on it? You're going to let your teammates down if you can't execute it and you haven't practiced it at all. So how's that a go-to skill set that you haven't even worked on or practiced? I think those are the bits that I've definitely found have helped me transitioning from sport into business, but stuff that I picked up across both.
Confidence, when it compounds, is really powerful, isn't it? There's definitely a link to preparation, as you say, but I've noticed once I've done something pretty well and then done it again very well, then done it again brilliantly, the next time that situation arises, it's almost like you're in more of a state of flow, almost like in a state of autopilot. And it's a great feeling to have, but you almost have to earn the right to have it through that repetition and that investment into it in the first place.
Yeah, and you build it, and it's about this perceived or actual pressure. So when I first walked into the corporate world, I'd go into a meeting and I go, wow, this is really hard. I'm completely out of my depth. Go in the same meeting now, and I've got such a body of evidence. I've got such an understanding of how the place operates and how business operates and how the dynamics of the people and what's likely to come up and what's going to be discussed. And I understand the acronyms, and I understand, it's not an alien environment to me. And that feels very normal, natural. And it once felt quite pressurized. I felt quite exposed. but you build it, don't you? The more you do something, the more familiar it becomes, the more confidence, the belief you build. And it's the same with anything. And I think the biggest thing that sport teaches you is to throw yourself in and to test yourself in uncomfortable places. And actually, it's a place of growth, isn't it? And it's such a cliche, but it is. If I'm not feeling uncomfortable in my job, I'm probably a bit complacent, and I'm probably not challenging myself enough. So I do seek out to feel a little bit tested, because I don't think I'm going to get any further and be useful to people if I'm not challenging and developing myself, or I'm just going to get left behind.
Absolutely.
Frankly. So,
yeah,
big believer in that.
If there's someone listening who is struggling with having that authority and that influence in whatever their performance environment is, and it's a bit more ambiguous and they're more unclear on it, like what advice would you kind of give them to help adapt their approach on their general leadership?
I think the big ones on this is have different conversations with different people, get to understand, because you'll actually work out that everybody is adapting and working in the moment themselves and don't have all the answers. I think sometimes there's a perception that everybody's got the answers, and everybody is very accomplished and very, very much showing up in a composed state 100% of the time. And it's sometimes it's the acknowledgement that everyone's in the same boat, and sometimes people don't know what they're doing, and sometimes people are finding it a little bit tough, and sometimes people haven't got all the answers. It is quite a reassuring place to be, and it's a place, it's a really healthy, positive start point. Otherwise, you never quite get to the outcomes that you need. And the biggest, I learned this in sport, and it was the first time I got sent out on loan. And it was to a team that I had always found really difficult playing against, really good top order. And I just was like, what am I going to do here? Like, I'm a bit in awe of these people. And actually, the first time I sat down with them and they said, do you want to know why we got you on loan? And they listed off a load of sort of traits, attributes, or qualities that I would bring to them and what they wanted to see. And just kind of gave me a role. And I was like, wow, no one's ever told me that. And it was because you just take it for granted in the environment that you've existed in for a while, that people should know what they're good at. People are showing up and doing their stuff. They're fine. They'll take care of it themselves. And then if there's a problem, we'll talk to them. No one had ever really gone, but this is what it's like to face you as a bowler. This is what you do that I find really challenging. And they flipped it on its head for me. And that was a moment where I thought, no one shares this information with each other. We're quite protective of it. And I find that in the business world is I have a conversation and I'll probably share my vulnerabilities with people, because I actually think that's the best way that they can learn and go, I feel like that. That's okay. It's okay. But as long as you're working on it and you're developing in it, then that's all you can ask. And that was the biggest learning. It stuck with me to this day, of helping people understand what they're good at, because sometimes that's quite hard for them to understand or see to the extent to which that is having an impact.
That's a great point, and I really relate to that. I mean, I've worked, as you know, in a lot of different environments over the last 20 years, and the best environments I've found are the ones where the leaders are more visible, but they're also more open, and they just give unexpected feedback to you about things, and when you don't see it coming, seeing them in the area you're in when they're not usually in there, well, that's great, I like that, well done, keep it going, good job. It doesn't have to be all the time, but it's so powerful and so empowering to everyone who's on the receiving end of it. And as you alluded to, I don't think that happens enough. And those environments or organisations that might be struggling to perform or perform at the level they want to, if that's similar things like that aren't in place occasionally, I don't feel that there's a coincidence why they're in that situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the consistency of how you show up. So I'm very deliberate with trying to be consistent with how I show up. And I look at it through like the lens of support and challenge. Like, why you can't have loads of support and no challenge, because it goes back to you're not helping someone develop, grow, and feel a little bit of tension or uncomfortableness or needing to get some new skills or anything. And then you can't just have loads of challenge in an environment with no support, because that is a pretty abrasive culture to exist within.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't leave you any room for that feedback, that development. It's just always on. I want more from you, or more from you. I'm not going to give you any support to do it. I'm just going to keep challenging you in a number of different ways. And that looks very different, right? But I try and think about it simply like that. And like, if I'm going to put challenge into something, I need to give the right support. And if I'm going to put loads of support, I need to up the challenge a little bit to help somebody. So I think that's how I look at it a little bit more simply. I suppose.
Fantastic. It's a great insight, and I can really understand that, and I use that similar concept in my practice too, and it's really effective. Just to kind of wrap up, David, with some final questions. What would you say the biggest differences between coaching an elite performer, an elite athlete, versus coaching a senior leader or a senior executive?
I'm not going to sound controversial with this, but I think in sport it's probably a little bit easier to be much more deliberate with the areas that you're focusing on, because it's much more exposed to be spoke about. And so your coaching to develop an athlete is about their outcome on the pitch. I think when you're coaching an exec leader or somebody in the executive world, there is a bit more ambiguity about where they're developing and how that shows up. And I think it goes back to that always on performative state that they're in. And it's about how do they carve the time out to think about the areas they need to work on. How do they kind of get that mirror held up to the areas that they need to think about? Whereas in sport, it's quite visible, the areas that you need to be working on, because they will show up very, very visibly in your performance on the training ground or on the pitch. And then in business, they can be masked a little bit. Some performance indicators can be masked in a corporate environment. And so it's how do you work out the areas that you need to be thinking about developing? And then how do you carve the space and the time to do that? So I think that's why I think sport's a bit easier actually to coach an individual, because it's very clear, it's very visible what they need to work on. It gets a bit more nuanced in certain areas. But in business, it's probably a bit more ambiguous and a bit harder to identify sometimes, whether it be the individual identifying it or a coach observing them all the time in interactions to understand what they work on, but then carve the space and the time, because it's an always on state. And so it's got to be much more deliberate. So when I'm working with senior leaders, the biggest commitment I ask them is the space, the time to switch off the external noise, to be really deliberate about what they want to think about, talk about, work on, and be very present. Like be where your feet are is very hard sometimes, because you've got an email pinging, you've got a meeting you've got to be at, you've got to go off and pick the kid. You're constantly in this on hyper alert state and being asked to give an outcome, a solution, an answer to a question. In sport, a bit more peaks and troughs. So you've got a bit more space and time to work on stuff, and it's expected of you to do it. I'm not saying much in business.
Absolutely. I often say to people I currently work with, and they can be C-suite, they can be athletic directors, sporting directors, in periods of where the pressure's on, you almost want to take fuel away from the fire rather than add it, because it's just going to give you less distraction and more focus. And it's sometimes a bit of a foreign concept for them, because they're constantly used to adding fuel onto the fire to make it burn as brightly as they can. But in their own world, sometimes that's not necessarily the best approach, because it just can cause distraction, confusion, and takes focus away from what it is they're trying to do.
It's an interesting topic. I think there's a piece around being coachable, and sport helps you understand probably how to be coachable from a younger age. And I think there's a lot of people that maybe haven't been through those types of environments, have been sort of operating solely from school into the corporate world, or education into the corporate world. And it's probably understanding, they probably know how to learn or how they like to learn, but they probably haven't worked out what's going to helping them be coachable. And I suppose in sport, you understand or learn a little bit more, and you see people all the time, how they operate in the environment. In business, the visibility of people in the environment is a lot harder because they're in different places, or you're working from home, or you're not. In sport, you're typically around people all the time. You see how they behave and interact in different moments. Harder in business to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's harder for you to understand how to coach or how to relate to land a message with that individual. So you've got to spend a bit more that sort of space and the time to work with that person, see them, get to know them, understand them. That takes longer in business than it does in sport to an extent. And this is about being coachable piece as well. But that's two ways. That's from the coach and the coachee as well.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I can think firsthand of situations and individuals where they're not open to it, and they either naive and don't know why they're still struggling, or they're just stubborn and try to just push through. And I agree that coachable piece is so key in making positive change. If just to kind of wrap up our conversation, what would you say that your kind of takeaway piece of advice would be for any leader listening that's struggling to maintain that sustainable high performance?
I think be really deliberate about the boundaries that you set, and be really conscious about the habits that will create.
Mm-hmm.
So giving yourself a bit of an audit of where you spend your time, and then really focusing on, is that the best use of my time? And where would the best use of my time be moving forward? And does that mean I have to have a difficult conversation and take some stuff out of what I do? And does that mean that I need to be a bit more deliberate with where I focus my time in other areas? So I'd say it's just creating space and time, and being very deliberate with the boundaries that you set,
mm-hmm.
and then the behaviors you choose to adopt to drive the right outcomes would be one of the biggest bit of advice I could give.
Great advice, and great way to end our discussion. David, thanks so much for your time. I found that really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners will too. I wish you all the best for the rest of the year, and thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you, Ryan. It's been brilliant. I enjoyed talking about this stuff, and it's great to chat you through different bits. So it's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If you found the conversation useful, consider sharing it with someone operating in a similar role. Leadership at this level is rarely experienced in isolation. For more on sustainable high performance under pressure, you can find additional resources at ryanblakeperformancecoaching.com, including the performance profile assessment, podcast episodes, and written insights focused on decision quality, energy, and leadership longevity. If this work is relevant to how you're operating, details on current courses, programs, and consultancy support are available there as well. Until next time, take care.